Hello everyone, this is Ben and I'm driving the car. It's about 10 after 9 and we want to talk to you about one of the classical proofs for God's existence. The existence of God. Now, if you're a Christian out there and a Bible believer, you may be saying to yourself, well, why haven't I heard about this? Well, the Bible doesn't really talk about how to know God exists. It tells you, what it does is it says where you go look to find the proof. And it says you can look at the things God created and tell that there's a God. Now, people get mixed up about that and they think, well, if I go look at the beach and it's pretty, that means that there's a God. Don't be so limited in how you think. If you can look at the things God created, and that means every single thing you look at somehow demonstrates that God exists. So what I'm going to tell you today will just be one little snippet of the larger experience, the really overwhelming and hard to describe experience of what God's like, that's all around us, really. And I think a lot of people, if the Bible's true, then a lot of people would probably find themselves believing in God, but having a hard time to really explaining why they do. But doesn't mean they don't know. But anyway, we're going to look at just one of the classical proofs. And it's not looking at the trees and looking at the wind, not that that stuff's wrong, but people get focused in on that. No, what we're going to look at is ourselves. We are God's creation. Okay? And we're going to take a look at the moral argument for the existence of God. Argument from, in other words, morality proves that God exists. Alright? So, the way it works is like this. Right and wrong exists only if God exists. Right and wrong exists, therefore God exists. Now, this is a logically valid argument, and that doesn't mean that it's true. That just means that if premise one, if the first thing I said, right and wrong exists only if God exists, if that's true, and if right and wrong exists, then therefore God must exist, if that makes sense. So it's like if I said Andy doesn't wear socks, people who don't wear socks have stinky feet. If both of those are true, then it follows necessarily and logically that Andy therefore has stinky feet. So the question is, well, are those two first points true? Now, what we want to focus on in this video is the evolutionary argument against the moral argument for the existence of God. So in other words, people claim that evolution, the theory of evolution, explains away morality and explains it in a way without a need for God. Okay, so well, how on earth does evolution explain it? Well, what evolution says is basically, if I go around and I believe, kill your neighbor, hate your neighbor, then if a species of animals that believe that would probably die out. But a species of animals that had some sort of belief, love your neighbor, well, they'll probably go on to, reproduce and be a little more likely to survive. So in other words, creatures that have these traits of, have the trait of believing and love your neighbor are going to be more likely to reproduce. So, in other words, the evolutionary argument against morality is essentially an argument that says that morality is not real. There is no such thing as right and wrong. Right and wrong does not exist. In other words, when we say morality, we mean that some things really are right and some things really are wrong. There are some things that really are bad, and it does matter that you shouldn't do this and that you should do that. And so the thing is, if we just evolve this way, well then it just so happens that we evolved this way. We could have evolved another way, and it's not any better or any worse. We just think that it's better or worse to love your neighbor, because it made our ancestors more likely to survive. But our other ancestor, or the other species, I guess, who didn't believe that, they died out. And they're not really bad, that's just the way things are. That's just the way it is. That's just the way evolution works. That these ones that believe love your neighbor are going to be more likely to survive. And they're not any better or any worse. They didn't evolve in the right way. They just evolved in the way that is more likely to survive. There is no right way to evolve or wrong way to evolve. This is just how you evolved. So the issue with this is what they're saying is that this whole notion of morality is fake. Now the problem is that we all have a moral sense. We have this sense experience that there's such a thing as morality, and that some things are wrong, that you shouldn't do this, and that if this is good that this happened. It's good to love people. It's bad to hate people and lie to people and trick people. You know, it's bad to be selfish and greedy. You know, we all have that experience. We sense that, and it doesn't even matter if anyone else senses it. You sense it. It's a sense experience. It's no different from, you know, when you look at something. When you open your eyes and you see a car, like I'm seeing cars, I'm stuck behind a slow car and I'm just getting passed by a million cars right now, but I see those cars are there. All right? Well, with morality, you don't see the way things are. Your moral sense tells you the way things ought to be, the way they should be. And that's a fundamental difference that we need to keep in mind. And if we can keep that in mind, if you can understand that difference, then everything in this video, which is heavily philosophical, I guess, will make sense to you. Okay? So, understand, morality is about the way things should be, about the way they ought to be, not necessarily about the way they are. I'm finally going to get to pass them. Okay, so, this is what David Hume called the is-ought distinction. That there is a distinction between what is and what should be. In other words, if I do something bad, then that is not the way things ought to be, but it is the way things are. I really did do that. Okay, so it's a fundamental difference in category. Now, we have this sense experience. We all sense, you know, we all sense that, yeah, that's bad. Yeah, this is good. Yeah, I shouldn't do that. That was wrong. That's not right. Okay. The evolutionary explanation essentially is saying that sense experience you have is just an illusion, just a byproduct of billions of years of evolution. And that it's not really real. You didn't really, you know, you just happen to have evolved that way. But if some other trait was more beneficial to your survival as a species, then you would have evolved to think something totally different. You know, and it wouldn't be there is no right way or wrong way to evolve. It's just the way it happened. Okay, so here's the thing. Essentially what they're saying, you know, the evolutionary part doesn't matter. What they're saying is that sense experience you have is fake. It's not real. It's an illusion. There is no right or wrong. So what they're saying is that second premise of the moral argument, that right and wrong exist, they're saying, well, that's not true. There is no right and wrong. And any sense experience you have of right and wrong, that's fake. That's an illusion. Now the problem we run into is that, well, that bat swings both ways. What about all of our other sense experiences? They could all be illusions. You know, everything you see could be an illusion. You know, we all seen things and thought they were real, and it turned out it wasn't. But I mean, in reality, if you want to explain away and create, you know, sort of a fancy evolutionary explanation to explain away the moral sense, well, I could explain away the other senses with, you know, an equally fancy explanation. For example, we'll just give you three. The brain in a vat problem. You could be a brain in like a tank with some mad scientist somewhere who's got wires hooked to your brain, and he's feeding, you know, visual images to your optic nerve so that you think you see what you're seeing, but you're really just seeing his computer program that he's sending there, you know, and your nerve, where your nerves come in your spinal cord for touch and taste and smell and all that, he's just feeding that information in. And it's a very complicated computer system, but you're just really a brain in a vat, and all of your sense experiences are an illusion. Or how about this? What if the world is 5 minutes old and just started existing 5 minutes ago, and you started existing 5 minutes ago, and everyone started existing 5 minutes ago, and we just have all of our memories, just in place, and the world looks like it's older than 5 minutes, but it's really 5 minutes old. So, I mean, those two examples, the issue is, how do you prove that you can trust all of your senses, all of your sensations of the exterior world, your observations? Well, what you cannot do is just say, well, I proved them true with observation. In other words, science cannot answer these questions. It is impossible for science to defeat these questions. For example, let's take a look at the fishbowl problem. Fishbowl problem is like, let's say we're all fish in a fishbowl in a sense. Not that you really are, but that when we look on the exterior world, what we see is distorted through the fishbowl. The way what fish see of us is distorted, and they don't see us as we really are. What if it's the same thing for us as fish in the fishbowl? And this is what Stephen Hawking talks about in his recent book, The Grand Design. He goes through a bunch of essentially research and data and observations that scientists have made, and he gives some theories about possible explanations of it. But he says in the first chapter, everything I'm saying could be wrong because of the fishbowl problem. And here's the thing: even if we find that we are seeing through a distorted fishbowl, and we find the fishbowl out there, when we do better science and find it, here's the problem: there could always be another even greater fishbowl that's still distorting it, and there could always be one. And so the problem is if you want to say that, scientific observation and research and data is the ultimate test for truth, well, how do you test to tell if you can trust it or not? How do you prove that observation is trustworthy if the only test for truth that you have is observation? You're going to wind up in circular reasoning. Observation is true because observation is true, and because I can trust it. That's like saying I'm always right because I'm never wrong, or like the Bible's true because the Bible says so. That's circular reasoning. I can trust observation because I can always trust observation. That's circular reasoning. Okay, so what we have to do to get past this is we need to bring in something else. And in other words, this is a question that physics cannot answer. Physics and science and all that, it just can't answer the question of whether or not we can trust our observations. All they can do is analyze our observations and come up with theories that fit them. But it can't test if observation itself is trustworthy. What you can do is do what's called metaphysical work on the question. In other words, since it's a metaphysical question, since it's outside of physics, and then the only tools we have to answer the question are metaphysics. And so this is where we have to bring in philosophical reasoning or logical thought. And that's kind of a tool we can use to analyze questions beyond observations. So for example, 1 + 1 = 2 is a metaphysical truth, because it doesn't matter what you observe, and no matter what planet you go to, or even if we went to parallel universes, we know that it has to be true for that universe that 1 + 1 = 2 in that universe, because it's just the nature of 1 + 1 = 2. It's necessarily true. It cannot fail to be true because of what it is. And so logical and mathematical truths are like that. And it's not that they're not descriptions of the way of what we observe. Rather, we know that what we observe must fit them. And if we observe something that doesn't fit them, then what we observe must be a mistake or an illusion. All right, so we apply philosophical reasoning to the fishbowl problem, the observation problem, and I like to use the example of your hand. So hold your hand in front of your face. Now, you see a hand, right? But it may be an illusion. There may not really be a hand there. How do you justify that it really exists? Here's the thing to understand. Here's the metaphysical part of this. It doesn't matter. the illusion of a hand is real. It does exist. You do see the illusion. You do see a hand. It may not really exist, but the illusion exists. And even if our entire world is nothing but an illusion, it's not really a relevant difference. Logically speaking, it is still the world in which we live. Even if it's a fake world, well, the fake world is my world, and that's the world I live in every day. So, in other words, merrily, merrily row your boat gently down the stream. You know, I forget how the song goes, but life is but a dream, right? Well, if that's true, if life is just a dream world, then the dream world is also my life. If that makes sense. So hopefully you're following along at this point. And this is where it gets critical. The first premise of the moral argument. Remember, what people are saying is that, well, the moral sense is an illusion, and what I've said is, well, all of our senses could be an illusion. But the fact of the matter is, the illusion still exists. So what explains the existence of the illusion? And that's the first premise of the moral argument. You cannot produce even an illusion of good and evil without someone. It does not flow from a thing. That is what I told you before. That is the is-ought distinction. There's a fundamental difference between the way things are and the way they ought to be. So, for example, if you see a mountain covered with trees, and you see a mountain over here that was covered with trees, and they cut all the trees down, and you say, well, that's not natural. They shouldn't cut those trees down. Well, natural just means the way things normally are. But you cannot move from that and say that's the way they should be or the way they ought to be. You're going to have to bring in, if you want to say that those trees shouldn't be cut down, you're going to have to bring in someone who has some sort of intention or desire or purpose for why that mountain exists. If it just exists, if it's just a thing, then who's to say, you know, or how do you move from this thing exists to, well, this is the way things should be and this is the way things should not be? You see, if you see 100 cars over there, then 100 cars are over there. But how do you move from that to 100 cars should be over there? How do you generate that's the way things ought to be, that's the way things should be? That is what the first premise of the moral argument focuses on. That you cannot derive any proposition or truth claim about the way things should be from things that simply exist. If you have a rock, then the rock is. You can't move from the rock to is to the rock should be, or anything should be, or anything should not be. Okay? So any idea about the way things should be must flow from a being, from someone. So hopefully that makes sense. In other words, the evolutionary explanation says that our moral sense is an illusion. Well, all of our senses could be an illusion, but the point is the illusions are still real and they are still the world in which we inhabit. But the interesting thing is the other sense experiences could happen by accident. You know, a couple of rocks could bump into one another and just produce, you know, a different way that things are, but they cannot move from you can't move from this is how things are to this is how things should be without a being, without someone, without, you know, not a thing that just does what it does based on its intrinsic properties, but someone who has desires, purpose, and thought. So at this point you could say, well, okay, Gnosticism, right? I don't know if you know what the Gnostics believed, but after about 100 years after Christianity was born, or about 200 years-ish, this group that split off from Christianity, the first sort of Christian heresy, I guess, Gnosticism was born. And what they believed is that the God of the Bible was really evil, and that the whole world was an illusion, and that even the moral laws of good and evil were a big illusion. And they called the God of the Bible, they called him the demiurge, or the architect. And if you don't know, this is what the movie The Matrix is based on, where in The Matrix we're all We're all brains in a vat, you know, and we're put there by this computer program called, they call him the architect. But in their belief, some people are actually gods that have been trapped in this fake world, this world that isn't real. And what you have to do is do whatever you want from deep down inside, and not worry about the rules and the morals and what you see. All of your sense experiences, the moral sense and all the other 5 senses, they say, are all an illusion created by the demiurge or the architect. And that the devil is the real savior when he came to Adam and Eve and told them to eat from the tree, because by doing what they really wanted, they would escape the illusion, the fake world, and gain gnosis or knowledge from deep down inside. So you could say, well, maybe that's, so what? Like, it's an illusion, but it can't be generated without a being. But maybe the being just made it up. So this is like the divine command theory problem. In other words, whoever this being is, we'll call him God. Did God just roll some dice and say, hey, it's love your neighbor? I thought it was the dice were going to come up to be hate your neighbor. Like, that's the divine command theory problem. That if God just makes up the rules to be just kind of whatever, then are they the right rules? Or, they're still an illusion. They're not really any, it could have been something else. So they're not really right. It could have been anything if he's just making it up. So here's the thing, and please follow this. If this being is able to give us this illusion, this sense experience illusion of morality, then this being can control our perceptions of what is good and evil. As much as we try to fight it off, he can give us that sense experience, or it can give us, it can give us that sense experience. But here's the point. If this being has that level of control, then there is no reason that it would not tell you what it wants you to think. What else would it tell you? So in other words, if this God, even if it's a fake God, would still tell you what the fake God really thinks is best for you, is good for you, what you should do. Right? So then the problem is this God would have to really believe in the illusion that it is giving you. So therefore, he is under the spell of the illusion as well. But then that just pushes the problem back a step, because now that illusion that it has had to come from somebody that gave it the illusion. And then we can see this is going to keep going back a step, keep going back a step, keep going back a step, keep going back a step. So what do we run into? An infinitely long regress, or an infinite chain, of past causes. This illusion was caused by that one, and that illusion was caused by that one, and that illusion was caused by that one. Well, how far back does it go? Does it go back for infinity? It can't. You can't have an infinitely large number of things. The buck has to stop somewhere, with some being that is the primary being that in other words, that cannot be under an illusion. Because if he's under an illusion, that illusion has to come from someone. So he has to believe and know that it's really right or wrong. It does. So you may say, well, it could be an infinitely long chain, Ben. No, it can't. Let's say you have a barrel of apples with it, and there's an infinite number of apples in the barrel, and then you go home and go to sleep, and you come back the next day and look at your barrel, and there's only one apple in there. Well, how many apples were removed from the barrel? Actually, infinite number of apples were removed from the barrel, were they not? But there's one left, so infinity minus infinity, is it 1 or is it 0? Well, it's both. That doesn't make any sense. In reality, it can be any number pretty much between 0 and infinity. As long as, so like, let's say you labeled all the apples A or B. So half of them are A, or you labeled every other one, we'll say A or B. And then you remove all the B's. Well, how many did you remove? An infinite number. How many are left? An infinite number. You know, like if in other words, if all of them are numbered, 1 to infinity, then like how many odd numbered ones are there, and how many even numbered ones are there? Or let's say you label 500,000 of them, and then you remove the rest. Well, how many are left? 500,000. So infinity minus infinity is 500,000. It's infinity. It's 1. It's 0. It doesn't make any sense. You can't. It's mathematically impossible. You can't have an infinite number of things. So in other words, the buck has to stop somewhere. There has to be someone who's not under an illusion, who knows the truth, that love really is good. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you enjoyed this foray into philosophy. And what we're doing is we're looking deep down inside at ourselves and our awareness, or some sort of awareness we have that some things really are right and some things really are wrong. And then we move from that to say there must be a moral lawgiver, an absolute authority over what is good and what is evil. So this is essentially a defense of the existence of God. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you take time to think about Jesus Christ and Christianity and the fact that Jesus loves you.